All right, welcome. We're coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the week ahead, of course, where we set the tone for you for the week ahead on the news front. As always, I am your host, Liezle Wilson. Let's take a look at your top stories. Well, 12,371 new coronavirus infections have been detected in South Africa. It brings the total number of cases to 2,523,488. The Jacob Zuma Foundation says it feels vindicated by the decision of the highest court in the land to have a relook into the case of the former president. Right, let's delve into your top story at this hour. Fiscal sustainability should be top as a new priority for Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. This as he gets into office following a cabinet reshuffle this week. Revenue has been negatively impacted by the economic effects of COVID-19 and increased spending demands. Now, economists say that the new minister will have to withstand pressure for more spending from cabinet colleagues.
Enoch Godongwana takes over from Tito Mboweni as finance minister. This comes at a time when government finances are under pressure on the back of low revenue, increased spending and rising debt servicing costs. Economists say the minister should strive for fiscal sustainability. They say it will be very important for the new finance minister to make it clear to cabinet colleagues that resources are limited and that they have to improve the efficiency of the state and work carefully with the allocated budgets.
There are many challenges waiting for the new Minister of Finance. The most important is that the fiscal accounts are totally unsustainable. That simply means that we are in very, very deep trouble. And the most important thing for the Minister of Finance is to make sure that his colleagues understand this, that he gets the support of his colleagues, because that means that state spending needs to be cut. And that means that we need to spend less money on people, and we cannot keep on supporting the state-owned enterprises.
But until South Africa can achieve a sustainable higher economic growth, fiscal sustainability will remain a challenge. It can only be achieved by addressing the factors hindering growth.
Rapid economic growth will, of course, imply that the tax base will grow and therefore tax collections will grow. But with rapid economic growth, we will also see growth in employment. And growth in employment will bring more taxpayers into the net. So fiscal sustainability is an important objective, but in the final analysis, fiscal sustainability must support sustained economic growth in South Africa. And to get sustained economic growth, we have to look at the growth impediments in the country. Things like unnecessary regulation, things like limiting factors on business activities.
Rousseau says government's move to zero-based budgeting will help towards financial sustainability, as money will be allocated on a needs basis to help keep a check on government spending. Gloria Sefakomusi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
On that note, for a look at the week ahead, we're joined by Business Day political editor Hadra Omarji. Hadra, very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I think just off the back of the latest reshuffle on Thursday, I mean, there's been some mixed reactions coming through, Ari, this cabinet shakeup. Now, this week with the new finance minister and others obviously taking up mammoth tasks in their respective offices, has this shakeup instilled confidence in its ability to repair the country's problems? What is emerging on that front?
Well, the markets are showing some positive indicators, as they have been for some months now. It seems President Cyril Ramaphosa's reform agenda is something that has inspired business confidence and the confidence of international rating agencies. But it is a reshuffle that took months and years to come about. In fact, President Ramaphosa has looked for a new finance minister since 2009, and the best he could do was Enoch Godongwana. It was also somewhat of a reshuffling of the chairs. The point though that has been made is that where there is non-performance, where ministers are caught napping, as they were during the recent unrest, there will be accountability and consequence management, and I think that's a good thing.
So with that said, I mean, as they come into office this week, what is their key mandate? What is the focus as they get the ball rolling?
Well, I think 27 years of governance failures by the ANC, which is the governing party, is something that South Africa has paid dearly for over the last year and a half. COVID-19 has really destroyed the livelihoods of many. And I think President Ramaphosa will do well to remember that the ANC's electoral support has been declining in successive elections. The reason the party won a two-thirds majority back in 1999 is because the lives of ordinary South Africans improved significantly. So I do think the governing party is in deep trouble, given the lived experience and the economic pressure ordinary South Africans are under. We seem to be paying for everything, including state capture. And that is not a situation that I think especially middle-class South Africans would be willing to tolerate for much longer. Ramaphosa would also be aware that in terms of liberation movements, they tend to show a massive decline around the 30-year mark, and we are just 3 years away from that.
So, Hydra, moving on to another big story that's also coming, into the fore this week. This is former President Jacob Zuma makes his first court appearance since being jailed early last month for contempt of court. I mean, security issues amounting to billions lost and over 330 lives also have been, quantified to date. So on the back of the security response and in the wake of these economic protests and looting, all eyes are going to be on security forces this week and their responses.
Well, it's no surprise that former President Jacob Zuma was the catalyst for this ticking time bomb of unemployment and inequality that we've known about, and even said as much as that it is a ticking time bomb since 1996. The question is it worth the pain as we build our constitutional democracy? The governing party and President Ramaphosa said that the law must take its course. All are equal before the law, and the culture of impunity must come to an end. That is why they chose to not launch a political intervention and allowed the summons to be executed or the warrant to be executed for Zuma to go to jail. They have not, though, other than the reshuffle of the national executive, arrested and successfully prosecuted the instigators behind the political insurgency. And that is worrying because opponents to our constitutional democracy would have tested the waters during that period in terms of how would it be possible to overthrow the state. Furthermore, it must also be noted that the President Ramaphosa has got to deal with the economic crisis in the country as urgently as he did and his administration did with COVID-19. COVID-19 has shown us where there is political will, there is means. The question then begs, why is there no political will to deal with the economic crisis in South Africa, which continues to deepen on a daily basis?
All eyes will be on the security issues that come out ahead of former President Jacob Zuma's court appearance this week. I think just onto another matter that we can also expect this week. I mean, there's also a legal dispute that's been sparked between the JSC and CASEC over irregularities in some of the interviewing processes. What politics do we see playing out in these processes ahead of the JSC, of course, filing their replying papers in the Joburg High Court on Tuesday?
Well, I think that's going to be an interesting story to watch, because there's a lot of focus on government and government corruption and government processes. There isn't enough focus on business as well as the issue of transformation. Liezle, I'm from the SABC and I'm a product of transformation, and without employment equity and affirmative action, I would not be today. But government compliance in terms of transformation in the private sector sits at below 50%. And that shows that we do not take governance seriously. We do not take transformation seriously. And I think the JSC CASEC fight is an example of that. We need to focus as much on business as we do on politicians and government.
Well, Hydra, speaking about transformation, and restoring inequality and perhaps equity at large, I can't let you go without speaking about, the current battles that our generation faces. I mean, we know each generation has to find its cause and then pursue it. How is the battle for emancipation going at large, and what more could be done in the battle for ultimate economic liberation for all?
Well, in terms of the context of gender emancipation, female emancipation, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And I think that the issue of equity in terms of pay is something that is important. I also think it is important that as we conduct ourselves as professionals, we stop undermining each other. We have each other's back and lend each other a helping hand in order to grow transformation and female emancipation.
All right, Hadra Omarjee, thank you very much for joining us on the week ahead. Again, she's the Business Day political editor, joining us for a look at some of the stories to look out for on the week ahead. We're going to take a quick ad break. We continue with more news and updates on the other side of this. This is the week ahead. Stay tuned. Oh, and welcome back. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liezle Wilson. The 47th National Arts Festival, which has now come to an end for 2021, took place against a backdrop of turmoil. Well, planned as a hybrid event, the Makanda-based festival looked forward to reuniting with a small dedicated audience and community of artists for a live festival. But it was not to be, as the country was moved back to level 4 lockdown and all gatherings were banned. In the end, the festival was staged online, reorientated and relaunched in a record 10 days as a digital experience for all. Now, while the festival still attracted a supportive and enthusiastic community of online fans, the number of visitors to the website was lower than in 2020.
Kim Panchi, and I'm proud.
The Shack, a short but impactful short film about Boetie and his struggles in the immediate and great environment he lives in, made even harder during the COVID-19 pandemic. Situated in the densely populated South African formal settlement, Boetie is faced with many hardships, from scarce income and employment opportunities to limited access to food, water and sanitary living conditions. Boetie works every day and yet has no income to show for that work. When the pandemic hit, he's forced to enroll for food parcels to sustain himself. The piece explores the cruelty of a world where the rich exploit the poor and their subsequent fight for survival. The producer, actor and scriptwriter Tebogo Chologi, who also won a Gold Standard Bank Ovation Award this year, says he hopes the story will inspire other creatives to never give up, no matter the setbacks.
To say if you work hard, your work can go anywhere, and can be recognized and get that acknowledgement from the spaces that you have never thought you will be acknowledged as an artist, So at this moment, we are in these tough times. We cannot meet up with people, but my words of encouragement would be, stay creative no matter what, because sometimes you want to be creative with things that you don't have access to, while you have something next to you that you can just, like your gold might be in your house.
Having to move to the online space just days after thinking the National Arts Festival was going live was heartbreaking for most creatives. With no live audience, no one to connect to, many were forced to bring the magic in the comfort of their homes.
You need to be creative. You need to think on demand. I remember my show, I recorded it the day after the president actually decided we're going back to level 3. So on that Sunday night still, we had all the plans to have a festival and all that stuff. And there we were actually, you couldn't go on with any. So you need to be creative. You need to have relationships, because I literally could pick up the phone and ask someone, can you help me? I need to record a show online.
A piece blending performance and dance to narrate.
Well, as South Africa prepares to celebrate National Women's Day tomorrow, we continue to highlight the plight of women in South Africa. In a country where GBV and femicide rates remain among the highest in the world, a second pandemic of sorts. Now, with the adoption of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill and the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, these are two pieces of legislation which are aimed at strengthening laws fighting gender-based violence and femicide at large in the country. As we continue to address systemic issues of inequality too, Professor Thuli Madonsela, Law Trust Chair in Social Justice and Law Professor at the University of Stellenbosch, joins us for a chat further. Prof, a very good afternoon and thank you for joining us. I think it's only befitting perhaps to understand the contemporary reality that we have by perhaps looking at history. What are the realities of oppression and sexism historically, and how have they been perpetuated and maintained in our country to date?
Good afternoon, Liezle. Thank you for the privilege and happy Women's Month to everyone. The country has a history of women's oppression compounded by other forms of oppression such as race, class, disability, and heterosexual preference, among others. It starts with women not being allowed to vote. If you think about the times of Charlotte Maxeke and Olive Schreiner, they existed at a time when women were not even allowed to vote, whether black or white. And then eventually, even when women were allowed to vote, by 1923, we were not even allowed to practice as lawyers because women were said to have not the right temperament to practice law, but the right temperament to be held accountable in a court of law, which is really weird. And then black women were not even allowed to occupy certain positions. And over time, when it comes to the intersection of race and gender, you see the country's economic and social reproduction burden being thrown on black women in rural areas as men were thrown into the mines but paid a pittance and not even allowed to bring their families to the urban area, which left the burden of care and the burden of societal reproduction and reproduction of the labor force on the shoulders of women, particularly black women. But over years, some of those laws have gone, but like a cast that creates a particular shape, the shape of society that was created by those laws remained with us when we took off with democracy in 1994. We therefore had a duty to disrupt that, and hence we adopted a constitution that said it was going to be the basis to heal the divisions of the past and establish a new society that is based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. And 27 years down the line, we have dismantled some of the pillars of sexism and patriarchy, but we haven't done enough, particularly at the level of the cultural attitudes and the economic pillars of gender inequality.
So, Professor, 27 years into democracy, I mean, how do we begin to navigate these power structures that currently persist in society? I mean, how do we look at the role of men? And how do we also counter some of the more microaggressions and even the silences that support some of the status quo?
Absolutely. It boils down to the cultural pillars of sexism. I don't think we did enough to rewire both men and women to take their new places in society. I think we do a lot. Organizations such as Mbumba Foundation and others, they do teach girls that you now have a role in society where your dreams are valid. But are we doing enough to teach boys that you now live in a society where the dreams of girls are valid, and that when a girl succeeds, when a woman succeeds, that is not displacing you because there's enough in society for everyone, black, white, female, male, national and non-national. People think in a poverty mentality that if you rise, I will fall. And I think we need to double up on our education of the boy child to understand that you don't need to have a backlash against girls because their rise is not your fault.
So paradigm shifts and rewriting some of the narratives that pervade society is pertinent. I think also government's approach to GBVF through perhaps the criminal law, which is the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill and the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill. I mean, how do these stances through policy perhaps encourage you as dynamics shift and the fight for equity, equality and justice ensues in our country?
Absolutely. Firstly, you hit the nail in its head. We need to shift the cultural paradigms in society. We also need to change the laws and also change the skills and attitudes of those who implement the law. Some of the people that are implementing the law are the same people that were trained in a system that was saying it's okay for a man to rape his own wife. It's okay for a man to beat up a woman as long as the stick was not thicker than a thumb. And those people were trained like that. When they are confronted now with enforcing these laws as policemen, as magistrates, and to a limited extent as judges, they tend to be more softer on the culprits because they think, oh, maybe if a woman doesn't act as required, maybe it's okay to hit her a little bit. And if you've paid lobola, maybe it makes sense to expect sex all the time and without consent. And so we do need to train people, and it has been happening. At the time when we were training judges to take their space in the equality courts, we had a course that was called Social Context Awareness, that was training clerks of court and judges to be aware of their own biases, to be aware of the difference between the society we come from and the society we are becoming, and for them to understand their own unconscious biases and disrupt their own unconscious biases. I hope that is still taking place in the courts. But with the police, I don't think enough of it is taking place, because even I have been called upon to cases where a rapist is not arrested, or an alleged rapist is not arrested, somebody who's guilty of domestic violence is not arrested, and it falls upon the victim to keep pushing and pushing and pushing before action is taken. And then once the matter is in the system, it often takes years and years and years before it was processed. One of the cases I dealt with as a perpetrator, this young girl was sent back for the case was postponed for more than 40 times over a period of 8 years before the Sowetan stepped in and NGO stepped in to make sure that the matter was processed. By that time, mentally, this girl was finished. Her schooling had been disrupted. Of course, we asked for some form of compensation, but that compensation, yes, was given by the Department of Justice, and we're grateful for that. But that was nothing. What we wanted to happen from the Department of Justice was to rehabilitate the system, and that has not happened enough. Hence, these new bills are great, but it's the humans who will have to invest in to change their attitudes, to change their skills, and to ensure there are synergies so that nothing falls through the cracks.
All right, Professor Liezle Wilson. I mean, there's so much to explore. And again, as we take on the baton handed over by our forebearers, I just want to thank you for your time today on the SABC, chatting about the plight of women during Women's Month. Of course, that is Professor Liezle Wilson, Law Trust Chair in Social Justice and Law Professor at the University of Stellenbosch. Again, just expanding on the plight of women during Women's Month. That is where we're going to leave it for now. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always, from myself, Liezle Wilson, and the rest of the team. Until next week, God willing, it is goodbye for now.